It is time for another episode of the Apple Circle podcast, and as predicted last week, WWDC invites are out. It's official. Some interesting tea leaves to look into as far as the slogans and invites go, but we'll get all to that in a second. Lots of other Apple news. We got a lot on the iPhone this week. iPhone 14, iPhone 15, iPhone 16. We've got some Mac news, lots to get into this week, and it's going to be an exciting show. But of course, as always, we want to hear from you guys. If you guys have some feedback, you've got some questions, you've got comments, we want to hear from you. This is a two-way street. Let us know. You can text us or call us at the Apple Circle hotline. That number, of course, is 949-354-3508. You can text that number. You can call it. You can leave us a voicemail, or you can tweet us. We're the Apple Circle on Twitter. You can go also to our YouTube channel. It's called the Apple Circle Podcast, where we post clips and full-length video versions of the podcast on there. So if you are a fan of video, I personally like video podcasts, sort of see and the different facial expressions and the hand gestures and see everybody in real time. If you are a fan of video podcasts, check out the Apple Circle Podcast channel. And I think that's all the housekeeping out of the way. Matt, it's another week. How you doing? How are things in beautiful, snowy Utah?
It snowed yesterday, and now it's completely sunny again. So weather is trying to make up its mind since we're into spring here. But the exciting thing is we finally have WWDC official, the next Apple event we can look forward to. So that's going to be taking place June 6th through the 10th, which is a very typical time frame for when WWDC happens. And it still is going to be virtual. They're not holding in person like they usually would before the pandemic. Interestingly, though, one thing there is that it says at Apple Park they are going to have some developers and students in the campus to actually watch the keynote, which is kind of interesting. So it seems like the keynote's still going to be pre-recorded, but they're going to have people actually, I guess, in the theater. That would make sense. It says limited space is available for that, and then all the sessions will be online as well. So not really sure what that's about. Maybe they're gonna pick people that they want to actually talk to, so they'll bring them to Apple Park. Maybe that's has something to do with it. That's kind of interesting. But yeah, a virtual event again. They don't have any like taglines for this or anything, but the image of WWDC, like what they announced with it, is a Swift logo with a like colorful ring around it, which doesn't really tell us much. But obviously it's WWDC, so that's a developer conference, so having Swift prominently placed makes a lot of sense. And then also, but it's just kind of weird because usually in the past they'd have an Apple logo. I don't remember them not having an Apple logo, which is kind of interesting. So what are we going to see at WWDC? We can go into some of the juicier predictions, but you were saying, off air when this was announced, you were saying you're just expecting boring iOS 16, iPadOS with no real cool features and, all the other OS updates that we usually get. And that's about it. So walk us through, what do you think we will see? And then if it's nothing good, what are we hoping we see at least?
As always, I've got like the two different brain, what do they call it? Like I got two brains or like two like thought processes as this could go. One is the optimistic, exciting, Apple's going to blow us away with something really cool, something we're not expecting. iPadOS is going to get some major upgrades. You can run Mac apps, all that stuff. It's like brainwave 1. Brainwave 2, the more realistic brainwave for me is it's probably going to be the typical iOS, macOS, iPadOS, watchOS, some cool little things here and there, but probably nothing spectacular, earth-shattering. Though I will say one interesting thing, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this a lot, is one of the big questions is with the headset. Will we get some kind of look at the software for the headset? This would probably be the best place to do it. This is Apple sort of setting the stage for what is to come with the hardware. And I will say it's interesting. If you go to the Apple website on the WWDC 2022 page, like Matt said, there's that image, but there also is, I don't know if it's a tagline for the event, but it is their tagline on the page. And that tagline is call to code, which gets you guessing a couple of things. This could mean Apple is calling those people, to regularly code for iPadOS and iOS, and now's your time to code your cool app. Or is this a call to code? Like, hey, developers, gather around. Here's your calling. You got to code some new apps for this mixed reality headset because we're about to show off a whole new platform. Maybe this headset's based off Swift, and here's your call to code. Go out, go code, get those apps ready because this is coming. I don't know if that's reading a little too much into it, but I did think that was an interesting choice of words on Apple's page, whether that's what we're thinking it's going to lean into or not. So that's my initial thought on that
Yeah, I agree.
code catchphrase.
Yeah, the headset is the most optimistic thing that we might see. There's some other things we'll talk about in a second that definitely seem more plausible. But the reason why I think the headset is at least possible, it's not completely out of question, is one, we heard rumors, back since the beginning of the year that we're going to see the headset this year. So what better place to do that than WWDC, because you're going to need developers to be on board for this, like you said. I mean, this is going to be completely new, so developers are going to have to optimize their AR apps, which they presumably have been making for the iPhone, optimize that for this headset, and that's going to take some time. The argument of why we won't see it is because, well, everything's been delayed, and we probably won't see the headset this year to buy at the very least until, maybe 2023 at the earliest, if not later than that. But kind of going onto that argument in the opposite way is that just because since this is a completely new category, Apple often, releases those or announces those many months in advance between when you actually get them in your hands. They did that with the iPhone, they did that with the iPad, the Apple Watch, all of the new product categories. They often announce it, show you, here's what we're going to be doing, and then it takes quite a while to actually get it in your hands. That I don't see why it would be any different with the headset, and the perfect place to announce it would be something like WWDC. I guess one more counter to it, though, is that since it is for developers, it's very developer focused, there's not as much fanfare around it, so maybe they would want to hold a dedicated event, which I completely agree and get as well. But, it goes back and forth in my head. There's justifications for why we would see it, and then there's plenty of reasons why we wouldn't see it. The biggest reason why we won't see it is because that's just how life works. We get too excited about something, and it's just not going to come. I'm not predicting it's going to happen. I'm just hoping that it will happen. But yeah, I mean, the headset, I'm still confused about the headset.
Do you think there's a world in which Apple announces or hints at the headset without actually coming out and saying it? For example, what if Apple was to have a time devoted to ARKit? And hey, look at the advances with ARKit, and here's what you can do, and here's some of the new tools. Is there a way they can sort of hint, hey, look at all this cool stuff, now's the time to start, implementing it into your apps, without saying, we're going to make a headset? Because on one hand, I totally agree with you. I think there's a very plausible explanation that this is the time that Apple shows off at least the software for this headset. Here's how it works. I said that twice. Well, anyways, here's how it works. And also kind of here's why it's important and why you'd want to start developing now. Here's kind of what the framework looks like, and then maybe we'll have a bit of hardware to go with it later on this fall. That totally makes sense. I could also see Apple just not even talking about it at all, and it just sort of gets pushed down the line. The can is kicked down the road to whenever it is, and we get the basic stuff, iOS, macOS, all the basic software updates, which as of right now, of course, the leaks always change, but so little is leaked, there probably isn't going to be any huge groundbreaking change to iOS or iPadOS. That's not really been talked about. So if we don't see this headset, there's a potential for WWDC to be very status quo for developers. It's very technical focused. Here's some cool stuff, but nothing crazy. It just sort of depends. If it's the headset really is, coming in here and that's where the direction they go, I think it's going to be really exciting. If not, I feel like it has the potential to be, I don't want to say boring because it is a developers conference, but it's not going to be the hyped event we were all waiting for, hoping it would be.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I was just thinking this while you were saying that. This is not going to happen. I don't think this has been rumored at all. But one of the rumors with the headset is, yeah, it's going to have its own M-level chip or Apple Silicon built inside. Obviously, that makes sense. But there was another that it would have to be tethered to your iPhone. What if they did a CarPlay kind of thing where you bring your own headset, plug it into your iPhone, and now it projects the AR kit onto a headset? Because we did this video for the John Rettinger channel on Apara? No, I'm trying to think of what. There was some kind of headset that's basically got the same specs as what we're expecting from this Apple display. It's got the micro OLED displays that are 5K in resolution. I was like, I mean, it's kind of the same thing we're expecting. What if we just projected it from our phone into this headset? That's not going to happen. That's never even been rumored. But what sparked that was, how could they talk about this without it actually being a product? That's the only way I can think of it, is if it's specifically software made that you can use for other things, then that's the only way I could see that happening. Other than that, I don't think they're going to talk about this until they have the full package ready, or at least ready to talk about.
They've always got those really dumb, really over time AR demos that you're just like, it's cool, but like there's never a practical use case outside of those demos. But maybe this year something different. That's just, I don't know. I wonder. I could go both ways. I mean, I think that, like you mentioned, the hope of seeing that headset there is just that it's just hope. I don't think it's actually going to happen, but that's like the one wild card I could see that would really change that event and really make this one of the most memorable WWDCs in recent
for sure.
Apple history.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I could think of that would be a hint at something is like if they demoed an AR app from some developer on your phone that is clearly meant to be worn. Like, oh, you can get navigation directions through your phone. You just have to hold it up like this and like walk around. Like, obviously nobody's going to be doing that with their phone. That would make much more sense for a headset. So like I could see that being a hint to it. But that's about it. I mean, kind of everything else that they've done for AR has only made sense if it's a headset. Like playing these games and stuff, holding up your phone is such a lame experience. Like it's cool that it works, but it's just like it's not fun, I don't think. Like, but if you could actually see it, then we're into the next level of what this could be. But yeah, headset goes back and forth. I'm sure as we get closer, then we might know more about what we're going to see. Well, here's another question though, kind of maybe headset included, but kind of apart from this is, okay, so we got rumor from Mark Gurman that we would see Macs in May or June. Do you think this announcement of WWDC kind of wipes a possible earlier summer event off the table? Or do you think that, I mean, it's WWDC, it's always in June, so they just announce it. We still might get something before that.
I would love to see a May event, but I would be shocked if that happened. It seems like as the rumor mill sort of gets a little bit more clear, like the stuff is less murky, it seems like, unfortunately, we always say this every year, it's like the year almost gets like less and less exciting and like things start to fall into place. So what it seems like now is that yes, we're gonna have WWDC in June, and then we might have like an event or probably two events in the fall with iPhones for one and then Macs at the other, and that's probably it. That was an interesting point by Gurman, and I would have loved to have seen a May event, but it seems like a lot of the stuff that we were expecting to see has gotten so far pushed down, especially if M2 now isn't coming till the fall, then any M2 device that we could have seen sort of early summer, late spring would have made sense for May probably isn't going to happen anymore. So I think that unfortunately it's just going to be WWDC, we're going to have September iPhone event, and then either an October or November Mac event, and then that's sort of it for the year. That's at least what makes sense to me. What about you?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think originally maybe that plan made sense at the beginning of the year before, the state of the economy and the world kind of unfolded. We knew it wasn't great at the beginning of the year, but we were all hoping it would fix itself, and it just doesn't seem to be doing that. So maybe even Apple themselves thought, we're going to really have a ton of stuff this year, kind of almost making up for the last 2 years because just the state of the world again. But yeah, that just didn't work out. I'm in the same boat. I hope there's something, but that would be very uncharacteristic for Apple. They don't do summer events. I don't see why they would really need to do that unless the only thing I would think is like, unless they really are going to show off the headset and it takes too much time, so it's going to be its own event. Maybe they do that right before WWDC or something like that. But yeah. Okay. On to more realistic possible things that we might see. The Mac Pro. So the Mac Pro is the last Mac hardware that we know is getting an update from Intel. Apple themselves on stage at the Mac Studio event mentioned that the Mac Pro is the last device to get the Apple Silicon treatment and that it is coming. The question is when. It keeps going back and forth. So WWDC makes the perfect sense for when this would be happening because that's when they announced the last Mac Pro, which was in 2019. It's kind of crazy to think that the Mac Pro that we have now is 3 years old at this point, and it's had like very slight hardware updates, like just in terms of options that you could get. I think it was basically just GPUs that you could change, right? Like they didn't really do much with it. It's kind of crazy that it's been 3 years since then. But going on top of that, it's been 5 years since Apple kind of they did that very uncharacteristic roundtable where they brought in a bunch of why am I losing the word here? Help me out here.
Journalists.
That's the word that I was looking for. They brought in journalists and kind of talked about the state of the Mac and almost an admission that the Mac was in a really bad place. That, even more crazily, is 5 years ago. That was kind of
Which
in
is
response
crazy.
to the Mac Pro. Yeah, 5 years since that happened. 3 years since we got the updated Mac Pro. So seeing a new Mac Pro makes a lot of sense. This is the right time. There's a lot of things to get excited about with it, especially with Apple Silicon Power. But the question is, will we see it now? For a few reasons. So WWDC makes sense. We would see it. But it is rumored that the Mac Pro will be running on the M2 architecture, not the M1 that we have now, but the M2. And kind of backing that up is that Apple said on stage with the Mac Studio event that the M1 Ultra is the last of the M1 chips. So what does that mean? It could either mean that the M1 or the Mac Pro uses the M1 Ultra and that's as good as it gets. Maybe they have like a higher clocked version of it, but that's as good as it gets. Or more likely, I think, is that it is going to be running on the M2 and it's going to be using this M2 Extreme chip, which is basically two M1 Ultras put together. That's the current rumor of what we're supposed to be seeing. Question is, will we see it now? Because M2, we have not seen anything about M2 yet. So would they release the Mac Pro as the first M2 device? What do you think?
So I don't think we're going to see it at WWDC for a couple of reasons. One is that Ming-Chi Kuo for sure, and maybe somebody else, but Kuo for sure said Mac Pro is coming in 2023. And he doesn't clarify if that's released in 2023 or announced in 2023, but that's what it is. And the last Mac Pro that was sort of showed off at WWDC in 2018, that was releasing before the end of the year. So Apple had a little bit of buffer to get up for the end of the year. With this Mac Pro, for a number of reasons, if it's not launching until 2023, I don't see what benefit Apple has showing it off when you can't buy it for like 6+ months. That doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense, even though as of right now, there really is no reason to buy the Mac Pro anyways, because we know the Apple Silicon one is coming, but that's besides the point. So that's one of them. My second point is, like you said, if it's running off of M2, which looks likely, if the other M2 stuff isn't coming until the fall, especially we know the iPad Pro, that's coming in the fall now with M2, then I don't think it makes any sense for them to show off the Mac Pro with the highest end chip and then sort of work backwards. I think that it makes more sense that it does launch in 2023, and then either Apple waits and holds off and they show it off in 2023 at some point, or they tease it at the end of 2022 at like an October, November Mac event. So this is like the one where we get the new MacBook Air. This is when maybe we get the new Mac Mini, and then they give us a preview of the Mac Pro coming in 2023. And then once the Mac Pro is released, then at some point next year we should get the iMac Pro and stuff like that. But I think that the more these pieces fall into place, and if it really is M2, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to be seen at WWDC. I think there's enough with the software stuff to keep it busy, and I don't think we're going to see it. So that's the puzzle pieces going together in my mind.
No,
that's what I'm thinking.
I completely agree. And I think, I've heard some people argue that, well, they announced that the Mac Pro is coming, so it's obviously coming very soon. Otherwise, why would they talk about that? I think because Apple doesn't do that. They never talk about future products that don't exist yet, like ever, really. Like there's certain times, like Wall Street Journal, Joanna Stern, that's her name, right? She was interviewing Craig Federighi and like mentioned the AR headset, and you could clearly tell that Craig knew exactly what she was talking about.
Oh yeah.
Does that mean Apple's making one? Not necessarily, but you could just tell that it was almost like a behind the scenes joke that we're not going to talk about this, but it's real. That's almost what it felt like. They do that, but that's as far as they go, and they never actually mention a new product that's coming out. Yeah, sure. Is the Mac Pro like a completely new product? No, but they never talk about products that aren't released yet. So the fact that they did that is very strange. But I think the reason they did that is because they knew it was going to take, at the very least, an entire year until we actually see it. So they tell us that it's coming. Here's the Mac Studio. This is great. It's powerful. It's as good as it gets right now. Mac Pro is coming, but it's going to be a while. So basically, like, yes, it's coming. Don't get mad at us. We are going to update it, but it's not coming anytime soon. Buy the Mac Studio now. Here's what you get. That's my prediction or my interpretation of why they said that on stage when they really didn't need to at all. I don't think.
Well, and to your point, perfectly to that as well, I think that we have to understand that Apple probably said that because they're probably not going to stick to the 2-year transition timeline that they originally said. And if
good point,
they
yeah.
didn't say that, then people would be assuming that a Mac Pro is going to come at the end of the year. By at least acknowledging that it is in the works and it is coming, this has bought Apple some time, at least, over 6 months. I mean, I think that the fact that they acknowledged it lets you know that it's in the works and we could probably see it this year, but more likely than not next year. And I think sort of throwing that bone to the audience, so to speak, lets them know, hey, we know it's coming, but just so you know, don't wait around for 2022. It's in the works, but we're not going to say when it's ready. I think that's probably why they did that.
Yeah, and it's almost like, since they did do that initial 2-year time frame that they said that's how long it was going to take, I think that was obviously originally the plan, but things just happened, like we talked about with the AR headset and everything else. So that was the original plan, but now that it's not going to happen, it's more just like, don't worry, the Mac Pro exists. We're not killing it. Like, there was a lot of people when the Mac Studio came out saying, maybe the Mac Studio is the replacement to a Mac Pro because it's kind of as powerful, right? Like the M1 Ultra was beating a lot of the, lower level Mac Pro specs. So it's, if you didn't know better, there's no reason to think the Mac Studio wasn't the replacement to the Mac Pro, but they're just letting us know Mac Pro is coming. It just wait for it, basically. So if you're in the market for the Mac Pro, you know now that you can wait. Maybe it's going to be a year, maybe it's going to be 2 more months, who knows? But it's coming, so you can wait for that. If not, here's the Mac Studio, and we can get on with it. So yeah, I'm not hopeful that we're going to see it at WWDC. I do still think that makes the most sense for where we'll see it. But I think next year, maybe even next year's WWDC, I think is when we might see it. Especially, another thing to go along with that is, if you remember back with the Mac Pro we currently have, they announced that alongside the Pro Display XDR. We are expecting a Pro Display XDR 2, but another rumor from Mark Gurman was that we're not going to see any other mini LED displays announced this year on any other products. I guess, I didn't really realize this, but I guess technically the XDR is not mini LED. It just has a ton of dimming zones, which is very close to mini LED. So maybe that doesn't count, but I'm going to count that as kind of a similar thing. So if those are pushed back until next year at the earliest, maybe they announce the Mac Pro and the XDR2 side by side, just like they did with the last Mac Pro. That's my presumption. It's just everything got pushed back until 2022, pretty much. All the cool stuff.
And what's crazy too is, just to go back to a second, or for a second rather, to what you said about that roundtable discussion 5 years ago, it's crazy to look at where the Mac lineup is now as opposed to where it was in 2017, because for those who don't remember, that was when the MacBook Pro was like kind of a good buy. Like, it had just gotten refreshed the year before with that major redesign that was controversial. But that's when you had the older MacBook Air, you had the trash can Mac Pro, the older iMac. Like, their Mac Rumors has a little snippet of their buyer's guide from that time, and it was don't buy, neutral, don't buy. Like, everything had gotten so little updates that was the time. It was around 2017 that a lot of people thought that Apple would either just stop making Macs altogether. That was a rumor that the Mac line was sort of on its way out, or that Apple was working to combine the iPad and the Mac, that Apple had sort of forgotten about the Mac so much that they were just going to sort of combine it with iPad OS, and you're going to get this new hybrid thing, and that's what it was. And that led to that famous clip of, Craig saying, are you going to combine iPad and Mac? No. And everybody cheered because that was one of the big concerns, because the Mac lineup was so horrible. Fast forward 5 years later to Apple Silicon and these new products. It is incredible to see this stuff, and also kind of kudos to Apple. I mean, they have done a full 180. Not only are they invested in the Mac, but they are investing resources and designs and silicon architecture, and just, it's crazy to see this stuff. And I think the Mac, because of that, is better than it's ever been before. And yes, the roundtable was about the Mac Pro and a new Mac Pro was coming and stuff like that. But with this, I mean, the Mac lineup as it stands today has its issues and its quirks, and it's a little confusing. But man, with the new iMac and the new MacBook Pros and the Mac Studio and the display, Apple has really returned to their sort of root customer, that Mac buyer, and they have rewarded their efforts for waiting so long, because I feel like now there's never been a better time to buy a Mac.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's kind of interesting almost. It's almost like the tables flipped. Back then, the iPad was really exciting. I mean, obviously, people didn't want the iPad and the Mac to merge completely. They wanted features from the Mac on the iPad and vice versa, but they didn't want it to merge. But the iPad was what was up and coming. It was exciting. It was like, man, this is going to be the laptop replacement. It's going to be very powerful. It's going to do everything we want it to do. Now we're in the opposite. Now the Mac is excellent, like you said, and the iPad is still excellent. Like, it's still great, but it's like, it's the confusing one. Now the iPad Pro and the iPad Air, the 11-inch at least, compared to the Air, are very similar, like almost the same, except for a few key differences that are, you have to really care about them to want them. The Mini, I love the Mini, but it's just kind of, that's almost, I don't even know why they make that, to be honest, even though I love it. I have it right here. It's my favorite iPad. But I'm not really sure why they make it, except for people like me who love it. Which I still want to see the sales numbers on the iPad Mini. It can't be that high. And then they make the cheapest one obviously great for education and stuff like that. But then they have on the top end, the iPad Pro 12.9 inch, which great. But when you have something that big and that powerful with the M1 processor and everything, for what are you doing with iPad OS? It's just a very confusing line, even though on their own, each product is great, but they're just confusing. And I guess that goes to, will we see a fix to that at WWDC? If we're not seeing everything else, what are we going to see at WWDC? I mean, it's going to be the software, but what does that even mean? Like, what are we going to see?
I mean, I know we talked about this last episode, but I think that there is a point to be made, and it does make sense for some kind of power to finally come to these Apple Silicon powered iPads, specifically the M series chips. Now that the iPad Air's got the M1, the iPad Pro's got the M1, I could see Apple finally opening up a little bit and giving us Final Cut Pro and Logic on the iPad. I'm not sure what that looks like or how it functions, but I could see them finally sort of start to bring the DNA over and really put those M chips to use with these, more macOS centered apps. Is it gonna happen? I don't know. There have been like some rumors on it, but there's rumors about it every year, so who even knows what's gonna happen? But I think that if this is another year that goes by where they don't do it, I don't think they're ever going to do it, because there's no logical reason why they can't do it. The Mac and the iPads share the exact same silicon. It's the exact same M1 chip. The apps will work on there. Yes, it's not running Mac OS, it's running iPad OS, but still, there's got to be a bridge there for those apps to work. I mean, you can run iPad or iOS apps on your Mac just in a little window. Like, there's no reason why it can't be done in the reverse way. So I think that it could happen this year, but if it doesn't, then I don't think Apple's ever going to do it.
Yeah, and I wonder,
for whatever reason.
Yeah, Apple is like a huge company, obviously, but I haven't really heard of this or thought about this or heard people talk about this for the last few years. But back when this was starting to bubble up, when the Mac was, 5 years ago, basically 3 years ago, there was. I always heard that Apple, even though they're a very big company, is that they can only focus on so many things at once. And I still think that's true. Like, there's only so much that a company can do, even though they have, hundreds of thousands of employees around the world. When you're developing these new things, there's only so much you can do. So I'm wondering almost if, the iPad, because to get these Pro features, presumably, if they're coming from the Mac, maybe they would bring the Mac people to work on those for the iPad. But since the Mac is doing so much, maybe they just don't have time to do the iPad right now because they're just focused on making the Mac as great as it can be. And it's working, obviously. Like, the Mac is awesome. But maybe that is taking away from the iPad, because back when the Mac kind of sucked, they had the time to work on the iPad because the roadmap was, whatever the reason was, whether it was because of Intel being slow, whether it was because of Johnny Ive not wanting to do certain things. I don't know what the reason was necessarily, but maybe they just had more time to work on the iPad. And now that the Mac is really full steam ahead and it's killing it, maybe the iPad just doesn't matter anymore. And, for those that love the iPad for, certain things that only the iPad can do, like the Apple Pencil, drawing apps, having a great screen, that kind of stuff, it already does that. So what's the difference? And for those that want more, well, they have the Mac now, so it's great. That's the only reason I can think why it's not going to happen. Other than that, honestly, I don't even care. Just I'm trying to think. I'm processing this as I talk about it. I don't even care if Apple brings like Final Cut or something like that. I would love that. It's just more just like, let developers port their Mac apps over. I don't see why they can't do that. That's the only thing I think.
The only thing that makes sense to me, and I guess the one big issue Apple and any developer has to overcome, is how do you put a full-featured music editing app or an app like Final Cut with all these dials and buttons and tabs, how do you make that a good experience with the touchscreen? Because first and foremost, the iPad is a touch device. That is a huge issue that I don't know how they fix. Do they totally have to redo the entire UI of Final Cut and Logic just to fit on the iPad? Are they designing it with the idea that you're going to use touch first and then maybe a keyboard and trackpad? Or is this meant to really just be used with the keyboard and trackpad? That's where it sort of gets confusing, and I don't know what the answer is. I'm not a UX person, but that seems to me is like, how do you scale Final Cut Pro with all that stuff down to an 11-inch iPad Pro and make it functional and usable with touch? That's a big thing they've got to overcome. And maybe they went down that road, maybe they tested it, and it just came out to be that it just didn't work.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like, that's certainly possible. And obviously it is a huge undertaking of figuring out how this is actually going to work. So, I'm not saying that they can just do it tomorrow, but it's also been like 5 years since everyone's been talking about this. So they have certainly tried it. These prototypes exist. There's no way they haven't tried it. So yeah, maybe it just didn't work. I can think of one way to do it is maybe for an app like Logic or something, or Final Cut. Let's just use Final Cut because we're very, very familiar with it. Maybe there's the touch interface that then unlocks more features when you put it into the keyboard, because then you now have a Mac and so like maybe it's almost iMovie on its iPad form, but then you plug it into a keyboard and suddenly it unlocks more features. That sounds very un-Apple-like to kind of limit features like that, but I don't know. That's one way to think of it, maybe. Or it's just maybe they call it Final Cut and it is just iMovie with a few more features, and maybe it's just GarageBand, but it actually is called Logic. I don't know. There's things around it, but whatever Apple does, I'm less concerned with. It's more just like, honestly, forget the apps. The apps are cool, but let's bring some of the other things that we need, like being able to work off of external storage, using multiple displays natively rather than just mirroring it, and using, extending the display rather than just mirroring it. I'm trying to think of what else. Using the home screen a little better. The Files app, Files app's pretty good, but there's some things about it that it definitely could be improved. Some of those basic things that you just expect on a Mac, bring those to the iPad, and then everything else kind of follows, because then developers can make their own apps that then tie into that, right? Because LumaFusion, which is a video editor, works great, but the only reason I would never use it for a real project is because because the footage we shoot is like, gigabytes upon gigabytes, so I'm not going to be transferring that to the iPad and then transferring it off. I just want to be able to work off my drive like I do on my Mac. And you just can't do that on the iPad. So
that was my my whole idea. Like on my iPad Pro is, man, I'm gonna get the keyboard and everything. I'm gonna sit down. I'm gonna be able to edit my videos on. This is gonna be great, and I can do it anywhere. And LumaFusion, to the developer's credit, it's a great app, very feature packed. It can do a lot. But there were just a couple of reasons, like after a while, where I'm like, this just doesn't make sense. Trying to edit, the interface is great, but it's trying to video edit on the iPad doesn't work. And I don't blame LumaFusion. I blame Apple and like the way the cursor implementation is, and like it just isn't a fluid experience. And to your point too, you got to transfer everything on it, off it. It's just super annoying. And I'm just like, this just doesn't work. Like the iPad is it's a fantastic content consumption device. It's great. It's a great creation device too if you're doing the right thing. I think for that drawing, illustration, all that stuff is fantastic. Editing photos is really intuitive on there. Just for me, editing videos on there, I wanted to do it so badly and I wanted to love it, but I'm like, this just doesn't work. It's just easier for me to open a Final Cut on the computer, do it that way. I have all the Mac creature comfort stuff, and it's cool that I could do this in a pinch, but I just could not regularly do this. I'm better off just getting a laptop.
Yeah. No, I feel exactly the same. It's like, I almost wish like I was starting over, because if I was starting over with no, experience, then LumaFusion would be great. I'm sure I would get used to it. It'd be fine. Everything would be perfect. But it's just the fact that I know what I can do on the computer. It always feels limiting when you're back onto the iPad, which again kind of brings me back to this, which now that I have the 14-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Max, I don't care about having the iPad anymore, because the reason I wanted the iPad was for the portability and the small and the performance and everything. But now, even if the iPad gets those features, well, my 14-inch MacBook Pro is nearly as light as the Magic Keyboard Plus iPad on the 12.9-inch version, at least, and it has a similar screen, same screen basically. Yeah. It has faster performance, has ports. It's like everything I want. So like I don't care anymore. Now I'm using the iPad as an iPad, which is fine. That's a thing that exists. It's just I just don't care anymore. I want to see what Apple does so that they give me a reason to want to do it, but right now I just don't care.
Is there any other hardware we could see at WWDC? Could we see an iPad Pro? Do you think we see a MacBook Air, entry level MacBook? Do you think is there any shot of hardware here? Or is it's just all going to be in the fall? There's just nothing. Ready.
Yeah, I think it'll be in the fall. Yeah, I don't really think we'd see anything like, okay, there's the rumor of, some people go back and forth. Are we going to see an iMac Pro? I mean, maybe we see that this year because that's rumored to have the same stuff, right?
Way.
No.
I don't. 2023 again is what Ming-Chi Kuo says.
Yeah.
To your point, yes, it's supposed to use the same chips, but that would just be really weird to see that before the Mac Pro. So
would it?
And I don't know. Have you seen the rumors? I think that I don't know if it's a rumor. Snazzy made the observation in his video, and I think others have echoed it, that the way the studio display is designed maybe was intended to or is intended to one day be a iMac, that's going to be the chassis of the iMac that would actually be the actual computer. That's what it would look like. And I just also find it so fascinating that it's got the A13, it's got 64 gigs of onboard storage. The studio display is super quirky, but I wonder if they launched an iMac Pro with a studio display chassis, 27-inch mini LED promotion, it's perfect, right?
It's perfect. It's perfect, but I don't think that's going to happen.
No.
At least not at WWDC.
No, not happening this year. So that's why I don't think we're going to see hardware. I think iPad, we already heard that's the fall. All this M2 stuff got pushed. It's probably going to be, if we're being honest and realistic, it's going to be just the software stuff. It's going to be iOS. It's going to be iPad OS, which isn't bad, but it's just, I think we always get our hopes up for something crazy, and that's never pans out.
Yeah, and especially this year, the rumors have been off the chain, and then they'd be completely wrong. So it's like this year they really like we're gonna tell you everything is coming, and then just nothing. I mean, obviously we got some cool stuff, but it's not what the rumors were. Well, I guess speaking of rumors, let's go on to some of the only news / rumors that we've gotten this week. So a few things. First, let's talk about the iPhone. So rumor is no Touch ID coming at least in the next 2 years, which that is not surprising. The under display fingerprint sensor was rumored since when, the iPhone 12 or iPhone 11. It's been a few years.
I mean, it really heated up last year with the 13 Pro. That was a done deal. Face ID, Touch ID, but yeah, it's been a while.
It's been around, and obviously Apple has tested it, but apparently it just hasn't worked out the way Apple wanted to. So that's not happening. No real surprise there. The other thing is, though, that this is a rumor that we were supposed to see for the iPhone 14, but obviously it's not happening. That with the iPhone 16, we will finally see Face ID behind a display instead of having the notch or the cutout, which is expected for the 14. So not too exciting news there, and also not very trustworthy. I would say that that's probably, you could say whatever you want for 2 years from now. Who knows what's going to happen? So
I'd still call that optimistic, because if we look at how things have progressed so far, the notch has existed for 5 years since the 10 back in 2017. So it took Apple 4 years to shrink the notch from the 13. Then I guess they're gonna do the double hole punch. I feel like, well, actually I don't know. If they really do progress fast, I could see, okay, we have the notch as says it is 4 years, then on the 5th year they shrink it. On the 6th year, well, I'm messing up my math here. The notch is the same from 2017
3 years
to 2021. 4 years.
4 years, yeah, you're right.
The notch is the same for 3 years. The 4th year they shrink it. The 5th year we get the double hole punch. The 6th year, nothing changes. And then the 7th year is when we supposedly get rid of the notch, at least on the Pro devices, and Face ID moves under display. Why they can't do that now, I don't understand, because we've seen this tech from other companies. I know Apple has different standards that things need to work a certain way. Yeah, but I really don't understand why they don't do it now. Or why.
Well, it's because it sucks.
And again, I'm sure they've tested it.
Well, I have the Galaxy Fold Z3 or Z Fold 3, whatever his stupid name is. And it has the under display camera. And I will say, back when I got it, it was very noticeable that it was there. Now I just don't mind it anymore. But if you catch a glimpse of it, it is very obvious that there's something up with the screen. Like, they don't hide it at all. So that's why it sucks from Apple standards. Like I still enjoy using the phone. It doesn't take anything away from it. And it does, when you're like watching a video or just kind of browsing, it does kind of fade into the background and you don't notice it after a little while. But when you do see it, it's very obvious that something's up with the screen. So that's why they're not going to do it anytime soon, because it's just not quite ready. And I don't even know, honestly, the thing in favor of doing it relatively soon is that, the rumor, at least for the 14/15, was that the Face ID hardware would go behind the screen, but the camera would stay as a hole punch. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the issue with the camera that we have now in these phones behind the display. The issue is that the pixels can only get so small because the camera still has to see through it. So maybe that doesn't matter as much for Face ID. Maybe because obviously resolution isn't as important because you're not literally looking at a picture of yourself. So maybe that is something that they could work around, but obviously they're not releasing it anytime soon, so it's not good enough for Apple yet.
I think even more than that, though, Touch ID has been very controversial because people want it back, they want it back, they want it back. But I think that this latest rumor shows that I think that it's never going to come back to the flagship iPhones. That Touch ID has been demoted to a second-tier system, that this is what we have on the iPad. It's, on some iPads. It's on the iPhone SE. It's on the Mac, which that's a whole separate thing. But I don't think we ever see Touch ID return to the iPhone. There were some rumors that maybe they could pull an iPad move and they would build it into the power button, but I don't think that's any more elegant than Face ID. And Face ID continues to get better, and I just think that they're going all in on Face ID, and I don't think it's worth their attention and their time to bring back Touch ID, especially if Face ID works better. And I understand people just like the convenience of it. It's easy, it's nice. But here's a question, and I guess for you, Matt, too. Would you rather have Apple divide their time to work on Face ID and Touch ID to kind of give you both, or devote all the resources to making Face ID the best it can be to hopefully work in some of those edge cases when usually Touch ID would be better?
Oh, I think I'd rather have Face ID. I don't really care about Touch ID anymore. I mean, I have it on like you said, on my Mac. I actually, new purchase alert, I bought the new keyboard, the Magic Keyboard with Touch ID built in. Game changer, considering I'm docked all the time. I was just missing having Touch ID because I was using my computer as a laptop more often, and I just missed it.
So here's my question on that. So why is Touch ID so useful? Is it if things are locked? Is it because you want to make purchases? Like what's
all of the above?
Are you using Safari?
Yeah.
With the stupid
absolutely.
authenticate for the passwords? Okay, that's super annoying. That's why I use it. I
It's
get
excellent.
that.
What do you
Whenever
mean?
I open,
it's great.
Well, whenever I open in Safari, it's like, because my Mac's closed, like you got to type your password to get the password thing unlocked or whatever to get the keychain to authenticate. And that's annoying.
Well, it does that for 1Password too, to be fair.
Yeah, it does. But I did set up my 1Password to just not lock while my computer is docked, so I can type in there and get in there. And
I need to do that.
Again, my computer is mainly at home. Yes, that is not as secure, but I never lock it. I have some stuff open just because it's more convenient, just because I'm tired of having to type my password in every time. But I would like to see some kind of, they're never going to do it, like some kind of external Touch ID thing, but the keyboard is nice. I would use the keyboard. I like Touch ID built in. I just don't like that keyboard. Actually, I haven't tried the newer one.
It feels exactly
the
same.
How similar is it? Okay, then I don't.
I think it feels exactly
I have one. Is it in my drawer? So I might have packed it. I had one in my drawer as like a backup keyboard. I will say I still have this Logitech, the MX keys. I really like this. This has been one of my favorite purchases of 2022 so far. The Logitech one, but I get it. If you're in Safari a lot and you're doing Apple Pay and the authentication for passwords, especially, then Touch ID would be.
Yeah, I did order.
Do you lock your?
No, I don't lock my computer, but I do have it set to after you have the screensaver on, it does lock itself. So that I don't even remember setting that, but that's just how it is. So I'll use Touch ID for that. I did order. Speaking of keyboards, I did order another keyboard besides this one. I bought this and then I ordered the other keyboard at the exact same time. I don't know why I did that. I don't need two keyboards, but I'll talk about that when it gets here. I think it gets here in 2 days. But that one's a mechanical keyboard that is different than the ones we've talked about. So that'll be interesting.
Oh, I want to see that.
Yeah.
I want to see that.
But yeah, Touch ID, I find it useful, but I don't really need it in my phone because I have Face ID. So if Face ID just keeps getting better and better, then I'm happy. That's all I really care about.
Yeah, and we had heard some other stuff, like Apple's still working on the foldable iPhone, but it's, the date on that just keeps getting pushed back further and further down. 2025 now is maybe the thing. The double hole punch is going to stick around for this year, and next year it's going to kind of expand through the whole lineup. I'll just say this: there's not been a lot of exciting iPhone 14 news. If anything, we've just gotten confirmation that there's probably not going to be a redesign this year. I think I saw more leak CADs a couple days ago that just show it's basically the iPhone 13 body with the difference on the display is the double hole punch. Yeah, that's it. And then the camera bump might be a little bit bigger for that better camera. So it seems like really the 14, the story is going to be the double hole punch and then the cameras. That's really what's going to set the Pro apart. As for the regular 14, I don't want to say there's less and less reason to buy it, but why would you? Because maybe the camera gets better, but the design's going to stay, same notch, all that stuff, which almost, I guess, as we sort of wind down, one last thing I wanted to point out was from Ming-Chi Kuo, and he had a tweet. Let me see if I can pull this up. He was talking about how Apple had cut production of AirPods 3, that orders have been cut by around 30% due to failed product segmentation strategy. Demand for AirPods 3 is significantly weaker than 2, and AirPods Pro may get discontinued when Apple launches AirPods Pro 2 to avoid this issue. And the issue is that the difference between AirPods 2 and AirPods 3 is so small, it's so almost intangible, that most people would just buy the 2s if they can find a good price and not buy the 3s. And that's a huge problem because really there's not a whole lot of difference between the 2s and the 3s. And that is a huge issue, which leads to a couple of things. One, that's one of the problems with Apple keeping older products around, is when the difference is not that big, it forces a lot of people to go with the other one, which is, I think, why we've seen less and less older iPhones stay around, because when the differences are not that major, it forces a lot of people to just get the cheaper one and then they don't buy the new one. And also, I just think that it sort of is a little problem in Apple's current lineup strategy, which is let's try to create as many different options for as many people as possible at different price points, which is good. But when you have people on information overload and too many options, then maybe they're not choosing the one that they should, or at least the one Apple would like. Because I'm sure Apple would like to push everybody to the new stuff. But when you have those other things around, especially when the difference between AirPods 2 and AirPods 3 is so insignificant, it makes sense that AirPods 3 just doesn't have that demand.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of read this a little differently too, which I don't know what the exact reason is, but so yeah, compared to the 2, there's not that much that you would want from the 3. I mean, there is technically better sound quality. The design is different, and you get what MagSafe in the case, and that's kind of it. So there's not much of a difference there. But also, kind of looking at the other way, AirPods Pro are, significantly better, but not that different from the 3. So it's like, why not get the Pros? It's like the 3 is just in a very middle ground, weird space where if you care about things like the design and, those kind of things, and the maybe sound quality. Well, yeah, sound quality. If you care about those things, then the Pro makes more sense because you get the noise cancellation, the transparency mode, and it's the same design. So you do more with different tips, which is actually better for most people at least. So you get that, which is a better product. But if you don't care about any of that, then save your money and buy the 2, which they still sell. So it's in a very weird space. And the only reason that came to mind is because he said that the AirPods Pro are going to get discontinued once they release the Pro 2, which I guess is kind of unrelated. They're just trying to avoid this mistake. But I think the point is these things are all too similar. So on one hand, you're going to buy the cheapest one because it's basically the same thing. On the other hand, you're going to get the most expensive one because it's basically the same thing. So it's like, which one do you care about? Yeah.
Well, it's hard too because AirPods 2 are $130. So that's what that is. AirPods 3 are $180. But then you can get AirPods Pro for $200. So the difference between if you're AirPods 2 and AirPods 3, there's what, a $60-ish gap there, right? Am I doing that?
Something
like
$50,
$60? So that's a big jump. But if you've made the jump to AirPods 3, for $20, you get AirPods Pro, which are arguably better.
Are they $200 from Apple, or is that just on sale? They're always on sale.
No, they're on sale. But we just did an Apple Circle Snap on Snapchat. We have a Snapchat show, if you didn't know, about the buyer's guide, the ecosystem bundle, and I was looking into it. And it's not official from Apple, but like almost every third-party retailer has $200. Verizon, Amazon, Best Buy, everybody has it for $200. And at that price, like if the difference is $20, I'd argue your $20 is well worth it to get the Pros for transparency and noise cancellation. Those 2 features alone, I think, are worth it. Plus, I guess the case is wireless charging. I don't know if the battery life's any better.
No,
but
it's worse actually.
I think for transparency and noise cancellation, I think it's worth $20.
Yeah,
hands down.
definitely.
But if you're not in that price range and you're below, then AirPods 2 because you save so much money. So Apple's kind of hurting themselves. And I think they've avoided that with the watch, I think, pretty good. Though I think getting rid of the watch Series 3 might sort of clear that up a little bit. But definitely with AirPods, it's been an issue. With iPhone, like I mentioned, they have stopped sort of keeping the older one around, which has helped with that. And also, I guess, to that point as well, there was not a rumor, but Mark Gurman pleaded the case on why Apple should keep the older iPhone SE around. I think he wanted it to be $199 or something. And the problem is that if Apple did that, they know they would totally cannibalize sales of iPhone SE 3, because most people are buying that phone because it's cheap, not because it's whatever the features are. So if you could get last year's SE for $200 or the new one for, $430, I would recommend most people just to save the $200 and go with the SE, because for $200 for the SE2, it's a really good phone. So that's part of the issue here too, is why Apple has to be very careful on what older products they keep around and which ones they get rid of, because they'll start to sort of eat away at the sales of their other products.
Yeah, no, that's kind of the worry that I think a lot of us have had about Apple in general, is now that they're doing so many SKUs, it's at what point is that going to start to slip? Because that's what happened back in the 80s and the 90s before Steve Jobs came back. They had too many products, no focus, nothing made sense. Now the products are actually really, really good, so that part of the issue is not there. But at a certain point, the product lines just get too confusing. So hopefully that they won't make that mistake again. But yeah, it's funny when you, on one hand, it's like Apple can't win because they don't make enough things, and on the other hand, they can't win because they make too many things.
I mean, it's sort of hard to argue with their financial success. I think one of the things that Tim Cook did well is, I think that as much as this has caused confusion, offering so many different options, so many different price points has really helped probably make them a whole lot of money. So on one hand, they're probably losing out when someone buys AirPods Pro or AirPods 3 AirPods 2 instead of AirPods 3. But I'm sure they make that up in the back end when someone's like, oh, let me buy this case, or let me buy this or that. I'm sure it has evened out, and Apple is worth nearly $3 trillion, right? Are they on the road to $3 trillion or something like that, which is crazy.
Crazy.
So anyways, Matt, anything else before we wrap up? That was sort of, unfortunately, the big news in the Apple world for the week.
Hey, WWDC is coming. That's exciting. It's at least confirmation that we are going to hear something from Apple, which even though all the rumors point to it, we never really know until Apple says it. So that's good. I think that's good enough news to be happy about. But yeah, that's about it. Now we look forward. Hopefully we get more rumors about what we're actually going to see at WWDC. I'd love to see some rumors about the software, but we'll see how that goes. But yeah, that's it. That's it for this week.
We'll know more next week, hopefully, guys. As always, let us know your comments, questions, feedback. What are your thoughts? What do you think we're going to see at WWDC? Man, sometimes it's a tongue twister to say dub. It's easier to say WWDC or dub than WWDC. What are your thoughts? What do you think we'll see? What won't we see? Your thoughts on Touch ID versus Face ID? Let us know. You can tweet us. You can comment on this video if you're watching on the podcast channel, or, of course, that Apple Circle hotline is always there, 949-354-3508. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, for listening. We'll see you right back here, same time, same place, on another episode of the Apple Circle Podcast.